Hey everyone, so this week we're going to talk about how we can customize the look and feel not only of our charts but of our web pages. The first place that we're going to start is, if you recall, I'm back here in my scripts file. My index.html has really been cleaned out. I just have references to the other files that we created last week. And remember, the point of this is that, one big point of this is that it helps us figure out where to look for things. So if there's a problem with our data, we know that it's in data.js. If there's something functionally going wrong, we know it's in scripts.js. If something doesn't look right, we know it's in styles.css, right? So, as you start to create projects that have more and more code of various kinds in them, just sort of figuring out where to find the things that you're looking for is really important. Oops, get rid of that. That's left over from something else. Anyhow, so I just want to, so the first place that we're going to start is we're going to start with customizing the Google visualizations themselves. So as you'll see, I have here the chart basically as we left it last week. I switched mine from a bar chart to a column chart. And you can see that Google visualizations in doing that, sort of tries to make things a little bit more readable. But again, it's really important that we have direct control over basically all of the aspects of our visualization. So for where I'm going to start with this is, some of the basic changes that we can make. We already saw this, are sort of like in width and height, for example. So I can make this taller. Obviously, you experimented with the title, and maybe there were some other elements. That's a bit more tall than I would like it to be. So I'm going to knock this back down to 500 and make it wider. Okay, so now the question is, how do we address some of the other elements here? So I can see things like in that last case, my legend was getting cut off. There's obviously text all over this, and one of the nice things about the Google visualization library. Now, we can't change the look and feel of this using CSS because we're working inside the visualization library that Google has provided. However, they do provide lots of ways to configure things, mostly with JavaScript and JavaScript objects. So if we come back to sort of our column charts here, the way that they describe it, and again, this sort of points out why documentation is so important, because although we're doing documentation mostly for ourselves and for our colleagues, folks who create libraries like this want people to use them generally. Or it's just like such a big company like Google that you couldn't possibly directly communicate these things to everyone who needs them. So you have to worry about writing good documentation. It is one of the most, I would say it's arguably the most important job in developing software these days, or developing web interfaces. So there's a lot about, this is sort of describing a lot of the things that you can do, so how to color columns, how to adjust column styles, all of this stuff you can explore. The configuration options are where we sort of fine-tune the appearance in a lot of cases. And I'm going to look at how we can adjust the look and feel of text. Because obviously that's a big part of your visualization, is what these labels look like and these labels look like, et cetera, et cetera. So the thing that I want to point out is while all charts don't support the same features, if there is a feature that multiple charts share, it's implemented in the same way. So once you've figured out how to customize text in any area of the chart, and for any type of chart, it's going to work that way in any chart that has that kind of text, if that makes sense. Hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer with the example. So I'm just sort of at the top of the configuration options for the column chart here, and just sort of looking down, I'm going to scan through, and I come to something called annotations text style. Now text style we're going to see appear a lot. In fact, if I just do a Control F and start moving down the page, I see text style with annotations. I see it come up sort of in relation to the horizontal axis, which is the title text style. I also see that there's a property of the h-axis object called text style, title text style, so there's all of this stuff. So obviously there's a lot of places, the legend text style. So we see that figuring out how to modify this text style object is going to be important for us. And that's of course exactly the point, is that it is exactly that. It is an object. It is a JavaScript object. The options object is an object. The text style object is an object. It's just that having nested objects can get really tricky to manage all of your curly braces. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some of the refactoring techniques that we used on our files, and we're going to use them on our actual code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this text style object straight out of this example. Okay, so I'm copying this from annotations.textstyle. but I'm not, really worried about where it's coming from. I just know that it's a way to customize the font name and size and all of this stuff. And what I'm going to do is, instead of doing this all in line, right, trying to put it all in here, I'm going to go ahead and create a variable and say, again, you're going to come up with something better, okay? And I'm going to set it to the values in this object, okay? So you see it was part of another object, and so it was like, so that was the key value, right? The key was text style, colon, and then this big object. So I'm going to get rid of that name and just say, look, here is a variable called my text style. It's actually kind of a tongue twister. And that's where I'm going to put all of the stuff. So assuming that I wanted to have, for example, if I wanted to have consistent fonts across, or sizes or colors across my chart, which generally I would for the most part, then I can just write it again. This is the do not repeat yourself. I'll write it once, and then I can assign it in lots of different places on my options object. Now, for the purposes of this, I'm actually also going to move my options object sort of out of the fray here and up to the top, so that for my personal organization, I sort of, again, know where to find it. So I'm going to put mine at the top because I find that an easy place to find things. And I am going to try to, oh shoot, no, that didn't work. I was trying to be clever. There's an indenting thing that I need to figure out here. Indenting, so I'm actually going to move this in. That's going to be how I handle this for the time being. So I now have a text style object, and if I look back at my documentation, I see that in the options object there's a property called annotations, and that object has a property called text style, and that is set to an object. So what I need to do, now I don't actually have annotations on this chart. Annotations are sort of things that would appear like in the white area here, so we might want to use annotations at some point, but we haven't set those up yet. So I'm going to use it to modify the h-axis style, and somewhere that is going to turn up. In fact, I'll probably be better off just, looking at it this. So I am going to look for h-axis text style. You can see this is handily in alphabetical order. And I see that there is something called h-axis, which is all the way up at the top, right? It's an object. And it says, so this is not very, you can see why we could use some communication professionals on this. An object with members to configure various horizontal axis elements. To specify properties of this object, you can use the object literal notation as shown here. Anyway, the point is that I can create an x-axis object, an h-axis object, and give it a title, for example. So let's go ahead and do that. I have moved this up here, and I'm going to say, okay, I now want to have h-axis. Oops, I should probably spell it right. Now again, it said this is also itself an object, right? So there's my object within an object. And again, I can comment in here, and I probably should, because otherwise it's going to be really hard for me to know. So I'm going to say end of h-axis object and end of options, right? This is why we comment, because even if, eventually you're going to get it working, but in the meantime, you're going to go crazy trying to sort it all out. So inside this object, it looks like we can have a property called title. And so I'm going to say horizontal axis title, just to be really literal about it, and make sure that this works, right? So you'll notice that my desire to be incremental applies to all things, right? It is much easier to do a little at a time and keep checking your progress, because then if something goes wrong, it can only be one of a few very small things that goes wrong, and you can quickly go back and check it out. So I always recommend doing a little at a time and then making sure that things are working. So I'm going to do exactly that. I have tried to add a horizontal axis, and I'm going to see how this goes. Okay, so that's pretty promising. I managed to get a horizontal axis title. Now, if I wanted to change the text style of this horizontal axis, I could start, I could say, okay, text style, and I could start, and then I can make that an object, right? And I could, but that's going to get pretty complex. Also, then every time I wanted to make it the style of something, I would have to repeat myself, right? I'd have to copy and paste this whole chunk over again. again, where I can avoid it, I don't want to repeat myself. So now what we can do is, instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage my JavaScript, and I'm going to say, look, I know that there is an options object, and it has a property called h-axis. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to set I want to set a new property in that. Sorry, I'm just misspelling things all over the place. Text style, called text style, right? I know I can do this because I know from my documentation that it is valid in this, right? It says, well, that's title text style, but I know if I go down, I can see that text style is an option somewhere. There we are, text style is an option. So I'm just going to say, look, that property, and you can see this is a little bit how they do it here. They kind of don't go the whole way to point this out, but I can say h-axis.textStyle, and then I can say, look, set that to the myTextStyle object. So I've written out all this stuff once, and I can do that, and if there's no errors, I should hopefully get, oh, look at that, hideous, hideous mess. Isn't that exciting? So, you know, what if, let's just say, I wanted to make other parts of my chart match this? Well, look at, let's take the vertical axis, right? So I could say options v-axis, right? Text style equals my text style. Okay. Oh, not quite. What happened? Let's take a look. So, cannot set property text style of undefined. So I know that the only line I added was this one. So the issue here is that h-axis is a property that already exists on the options object. So that was fine for me to say, and by the way, on this object inside it, set this other thing. V-axis doesn't yet exist. So I have two options. I could, on the one hand, do this and create a v-axis variable here, which is a little weird to do if I don't have anything inside it, right? So I could actually do this and set it to an empty object. This should work. And indeed it does. My other option is to do this in effect, but to do it in code, which might be a little bit, or do it in in this dot syntax, which might be a little less awkward for me. Again, this sort of becomes a case of personal style. I like it with the dots. I find it easier than dealing with a lot of commas. So, but I just have to make sure that before I try to set a property on it, aka the text style, I have to create the v-axis object, so I can again just say, look, it's an empty object, and then set the text style on that. And in fact, that also works. So again, this sort of principle of using objects and properties and factoring things out, especially if we want to reuse them, is really going to help save you some headaches. Whoops, I see a semicolon. Is really going to help save you some headaches when it comes to managing your code, because basically, whether it's dealing with functions or these really complex nested objects or just data, right? Most of what you end up with is with a lot of curly braces that it's hard to remember what's what. So again, I would want to comment all of this, but I think using this method of sort of creating sub-objects for bits that you want to reuse and then setting them to individual properties is going to be the most sane way to get at some of the really important customizations of your visualizations. So in the next videos, we're going to look at Bootstrap, which is going to help us play with the layout of our pages, as Joe in the preview last week. So I will see you back here in a minute.